So one of the things I asked you guys to do while you were waiting is to go ahead and put together some questions about the assignments that are due this week. So do you guys have any questions? So Jordan asks, it's just an audio only presentation? Yes, Jordan, it absolutely is an audio only. It's audio and slides actually, so we won't see your face, but we will hear your voice, and your voice will be paired with slides that you show us. And Jordan also asks, what program do we have to use for the recording? Well, one of the assignments this week is that you will be sharing your ideas for how to voice record on your computers. There are a lot of programs out there, and you guys are really some pretty amazing resources. So I leave that resource up to you guys. So the presentation is recorded. It's a recorded presentation, so you will make probably in the end you'll end up making a video. So it'll be a video of slides paired with your voice. Does that make sense? Savannah says, mm-hmm. Does that yes? Yeah, thanks, Savannah. Sometimes it's hard to know what things mean. Fancy says, so what do you mean, what recording tools? Well, you'll need to have a tool to record your voice. So one tool on my computer that I use is QuickTime. I have QuickTime and I can do an audio recording using that. Another tool that I personally use is GarageBand because I have a Mac. So GarageBand gives me the ability to record my voice. If you have PowerPoint, PowerPoint often has a voice recording program that you can pair with your slides. So there are a lot of options. Does that answer your question, Fancy?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions about the assignments that are due this week? So the major assignment that's due this week is your presentation. So let's see, what have we got? It's the Brand Yourself presentation. And I think we looked at this together last class, but it doesn't hurt to look at it together one more time. So this Brand Yourself presentation is really about framing you and framing the way you would, making choices on how you would like to be perceived by other people, and taking steps to craft that image. Okay, so branding demands commitment to continual reinvention, striking chords with people to stir their emotions, and commitment to imagination. And it's easy to be cynical about such things, much harder to be successful. So this is a quote by Sir Richard Branson. And Nancy Duarte talks about branding. She says, the future isn't just a place you'll go, it's a place you will invent. Your ability to shape your future depends on how well you communicate where you want to be when you get there. So if we look at these two quotes together, deciding your brand is also deciding where you'd like to go, what you want to be doing. When you work with clients, what do you want them to say about you? That kind of a thing. And it's the kind of thing that feels, it can feel kind of stilted, right? Because how much control do we really have over what people think about us, right? But making a choice for where you'd like to go is it's a good start. So this semester you put together a plan, or sorry, this week. This week you put together a plan for this presentation. What was you guys' experience with that plan?
Do what now?
So assignment 2.4, you guys put together a plan for this presentation, for this Brand Yourself presentation. So what was that like for you guys, planning for this presentation? So Blake says it was hard at times. Blake, why was it hard?
What time? What does it say on the sheet? No. Yeah, I want to know.
And
Stupid as okay.
Jordan says, I had trouble getting started. I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about. Greg says it was new and interesting. Blake, that's a really good point. So Blake says one of the reasons it was hard is because he's still figuring out what he wants to do in his field. Absolutely. Yeah, I know this is one of the first classes that you guys, in fact, it is the first class you guys take, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're hoping to get you to do is start to dream, start to envision what happens next. And so some of that kind of involves researching the industry you've chosen. So this is a chance to go, so I know that I want to go into game design. So when I look at the job boards for game designers, what skills do those people say they're looking for? When I look at, when I listen to interviews with the CEO at my favorite gaming company, or when I listen to interviews with the CEO at my favorite film production company, what do they talk about dreaming about? What do they talk about? Do they ever talk about the problems in the business? Do they ever talk about how they troubleshoot things? So that's the kind of research you want to do to be able to create this presentation. So Blake, yeah, that's a really good point. It's hard to know where you fit in the industry if you haven't been in your industry yet. So in this presentation, you're going to make a guess. You're going to do that research and you're going to go, you know what? I think my gut tells me I'm going to focus on this. And then write this presentation towards that. Does that help? Awesome, great. Jordan and Blake, I'm glad that helped. Marcus, glad, fancy, yes! The words have come out of my mouth in a way that makes sense. That is so exciting. Yeah, some of the instructions, you have to read them a couple of times. I have to read them a couple of times, so I totally understand. So, but once you know you have to read the instructions several times, it's good preparation for knowing. Shelby has a question. You said that the audience is supposed to be the people you are trying to get to hire you. But if we are presenting to the class, who is the real audience? That's a good question, Shelby. So, it's a pre-recorded presentation. So, go ahead and imagine that your audience is the people that you would like to get to hire you. Now, does that answer your question? Your classmates will view your presentation, and I will view your presentation. But write this presentation as though you were going to send this video to your audience. Does that make sense? Excellent. Excellent. So that's why in the assignment 2.4, I asked you to do so much research on who you were talking to. So Fancy says, so we're acting like we're sending this to the main boss. Possibly. The main boss isn't always the person who hires you. And sometimes they are. So find out who does the position that you want to be hired for report to? So what division is it in? So it's maybe not the CEO, because if you're in the design division, the designers often hire the designers, right? And Esterlin, yeah, sometimes it is the CEO or chairman, and sometimes it's not. So, and that is where a lot of your audience research is going to come in. Go ahead and look at the structure of the company and find out. Find out what their structure is. Find out who reports to who. Does that help?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so a little bit more about this. For this assignment, it's a 3 to 4 minute presentation. Okay? So it's 3 to 4 minutes. That means that if you are shorter than 3 minutes or longer than 4 minutes, you will lose points. So make sure you keep that in mind. And you're pitching yourself to prospective employers with the understanding that you are a recent graduate of your own program. So we're projecting ourselves into the future and pretending that you've finished. So when we talked about researching your own degree, go ahead and look at what classes you're going to take for your degree program. So you can start to make claims about the skills you will have learned based on the things you're going to cover in your own degree. So we can predict that pretty clearly. Employers generally want to know what you have done. So you're going to want to use concrete examples of things you are planning to or hoping to do in the next 2 years. So one of the things this helps you do, just as a general person oriented towards their career, if I have already looked at what the people hiring me are going to look for, I can start to be strategic with how I use the projects I do in class. Now, the projects are, of course, assignments, but sometimes if you know they're going to want something that shows these skills, and then you have an assignment where you are building and showing those skills, you know that you want to tuck that away and you want to keep that for your portfolio. So this helps, by doing this research, it's going to help you plan for what you'll be focusing on in your degree program. Now, with this assignment, even though the one part of it is you're planning to do them, with this assignment, we're going to assume that you've already accomplished these things. Fancy says, like a portfolio. Absolutely. So you're making a plan for your portfolio. What needs to be in the portfolio? Do some research on that. That's something that you'll want to know that you need to collect, and it's better to know now than it is to know when you've graduated and you have that oh shit moment and don't have the tools gathered. So, these are the preparation questions. You need to answer these questions for yourself. So when you graduate, what knowledge do you have of the industry that you are striving to enter? So in order to answer this question, you have to answer these questions. What's your target industry? What are some interesting points about this industry? And why do you dig the industry you're going into? So why do you think it's cool? What do you see as your next steps in this industry after graduation? You need to answer that question. So next steps, that can be really tiny. That can be put together a portfolio. That can be send out 20 applications a day. It can be a lot of different things. Feel free to break down your next steps in really tiny steps. That can be helpful because it makes tiny steps tend to be more manageable than grand steps. What qualities or skills does your industry look for? So you're going to know this by looking at the one of the things is by looking at the job postings. So look for job postings for the jobs that you think you will want. What skills are they looking for? What types of strategies could you see yourself employing to communicate yourself and your brand? So Nancy Duarte talks a lot about crafting your brand, so you want to reference her in order to answer this question. And how will you use these strategies to differentiate yourself from others? So your brand isn't just, Fancy says, who? Nancy Duarte. So Nancy Duarte is the woman who wrote Resonate and Slidology, which are your textbooks for the class. So hopefully you've had a chance to check those out. If you haven't, I recommend it. How do you use these strategies to differentiate yourself from others? So differentiating yourself isn't just the skills that you have, but a lot of times it's your attitude. A lot of times it's the way you tell a story. A lot of times it's your own personal background. A lot of different things. In your particular industry, what forms of presentation are effective? So that's good to know. And of the presentation strategies you've observed or learned about this month, which one is going to be most valuable? So you're going to want to answer these questions. It will help you plan. Notice that I'm still talking about planning. Part of that is because even though you've done this presentation plan, you'll notice I'm going to give you a lot of feedback for questions that you still need to answer for your plan, and that's normal, that's fine. With that feedback, you need to continue planning. Part of this project is a continuation of planning and adjusting your plan so that it answers the questions that I am going to continue to ask you, and so that you're answering these questions too. Okay? So within your assignment, so once you've answered these questions and you've started your plan, you're going to write a presentation, and it's going to be that 3 to 4 minute presentation that's combining your voice with slides. Fancy, yes, this that I'm looking at is in the downloads. And these are the questions you want to ask. You want to answer within your presentation. But remember, Nancy Duarte talks about using that spark line. So I really recommend using that spark line structure. Marcus, you say, so basically adding on to the last assignment. Yes, Marcus. The last assignment, assignment 2.4, was in preparation for assignment 3.4. So you're going to take what you did for assignment 2.4, and then you're going to adjust 2.4 based on the questions I asked you. And then you're going to write your presentation, which is assignment 3.4. Does that make sense, guys? Cool. Savannah says, so you want it written and not presented as a rough draft? No. This rough draft is totally a presentation. It's 3 to 4 minute presentation. But a lot of times, you're not just... So you don't have to write this out verbatim. I don't care if you do that. In fact, I prefer people working from an outline, because outline lets us find a little bit more of that extemporaneous speaking, which is speaking from a structure, as opposed to reading a script. But that still means you have to write your structure at the beginning, so that when you're delivering your presentation, you actually have a plan and you don't ramble. And that's the same thing as you're going to develop slides that will go with your voice. So the video portion of this is slides that go with your voice. And what that means for you guys is you're going to actually need to plan the slides as well as the words that you say. Does that make sense? So Esterlyn, you are not writing out your presentation. You are not writing out your presentation. You want to plan your words. I suggest you write out your structure. But what you will turn into me next Sunday is going to be either a PowerPoint with voice embedded or a video that shows both voice and slides combined. Fancy, yes, it's a speech. And your speech is going to answer these questions. So within your speech, as you're planning your words, you want to make sure you identify specific examples. So if I'm going to make a claim, maybe I claim that I'm a really amazing dresser. Man, I choose the best clothing. It's amazing. So now I've made a claim. So now I want to use an example from my real life that will illustrate how that claim is actually true. And so I might say, I'm a really amazing dresser, but you don't have to take my word for it. In fact, I planned a wardrobe for my mother. My mother went to a conference, and she asked me to help her find clothing that would make her look professional, but also would look good on her and would be flattering. And so I helped my mother pick out clothing. It was flattering, and I thought it looked professional also. And as she was at the conference, she received at least 5 compliments every day on her clothing. And in fact, one of the higher ups in the company was really impressed. Okay, so that could be an example from my real life that illustrates that claim. I'm a good dresser, or maybe I know clothing well, right? So I see some questions there. Shelby says, so do our slides have to have all the words that we are speaking, or do we put down the info about it on the slides and then talk about it like we are using a teleprompter? Shelby, great question. As you construct these slides, you're going to follow what Nancy Duarte talks about in slideology. So you will want to make sure you use the chapters, the assigned reading in slideology as your base text. So that is when you're trying to figure out what needs to go on the slides. Go back to slideology and go, okay, Nancy, what are you telling me to do and what are you telling me not to do? So some of the major things Nancy Duarte suggests you don't do is she suggests you don't put all of the words you're going to say on your slides. Because, does anybody know why?
Keep the audience attention.
Yeah, you want to keep the audience's attention. If I'm gonna show you all the words I'm gonna say, then why am I even talking? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so just like we use really minimal words in the slides that we use for this class, I tend to suggest no more than 6 words per slide. Now keep in mind, you're going to be changing your slides about every 5 seconds. Because we can't see your face, you're going to want to make sure that, and one of the things that keeps our eyes engaged is movement. So you'll want to make sure that you're changing the slide about every 5 to 10 seconds, every time you change ideas. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that means you're going to have a ton of slides. This is not a 5-slide assignment. This is like a 30-slide assignment. Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So if you have any questions about this assignment, let me know. But it's the presentation you planned for last week. So go back to the plan that you have already prepared. Go back to the feedback that I've given you. And once you've done both of those things, build on that. That's the goal, is that you're going to spend 3 weeks building a presentation that really is focusing on where you want to go, what your dream is when you graduate from here, and helping you prepare how to talk about that. Okay?
Yep.
So we're going to talk a little bit about content and how we can make an impact with that content. So, some of you will see that I've given you some feedback that says make the audience the hero. So, Nancy Duarte talks about the hero's journey, and she talks about being how the audience is the hero of the presentation, and how you, the speaker, you are the mentor. So right now this is really hard to envision, I'm sure, because right now you're just starting off on your own adventure, right? You're starting off on your own journey. And I know that in my head, I am totally the hero of my adventure. You know what I mean? Because I am the person who's going through all the trials, I am the person who's going through all the stumbling, I am the person who's going through all the challenges, and so, I mean, yeah, I am my own hero's journey hero. So when you're writing a presentation, though, it's not about you. It's about your audience and where you and your audience are going to intersect. And you will get the best attention from your audience if you talk about their journey and how you can make their trials and tribulations and their hardships suck less. How do you make your audience's life easier? Another thing you're going to want to do in this presentation is you are going to want to tell stories. So just like a moment ago, I said I'm going to make a claim about myself, right? Maybe I said earlier I'm a great dresser. So maybe I say I'm a really hard worker. Okay, cool. That's a great claim. But if I just say I'm a really hard worker and then I go on to talk about something else, I mean, do you know what that means about me? What does hard work mean? Does hard work mean that I put in extra hours? Does hard work mean that I focus really hard? Does hard work mean that I do a job even if I think it's really boring? Okay, so I'm seeing Greg say blood, sweat, and tears. I'm seeing Jordan say putting in as much effort as you can into your job. Sure. So, tell me a story about a time that you worked really freaking hard. So Greg or Jordan, do either of you have a time, like a story about a time where you worked really hard at something?
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah? Share it with us.
Yeah, it's actually at the job I'm at now.
Mm-hmm.
It was middle of winter. I think it was like maybe December, January, somewhere in that area. But what I do at my job is I work for a mining company, but I don't actually do any mining. I mostly cut a lot of scrap and sort it. Copper goes in one barrel, aluminum in another.
Okay.
You know? But I was cutting this piece of steel off. It was an angle iron. It was only about maybe 2 feet long. And it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. Probably 10 degrees outside.
Whew.
And, yeah, and I slipped. And I'm carrying a torch in my hand. And fortunately, it was propane, so it only burns at about 2,000 degrees Celsius, which is pretty close to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And I ended up catching the side of my hand with the torch. And I had this big burn on my thumb for like 3 weeks.
Oh, no.
And I know, right? I finished out the day and everything. I didn't tell anyone about it. And about 5 minutes before I left, I walked up to my boss and I was like, look what I did. And just showed him. And he looked at me and he's like, what the fuck did you do?
Wow. Great. So wrap that up with what's the point of that story? You were claiming that you're what?
Willing to work through the pain, throw
You
some
work.
dirt on it, and take a lap.
That's great. You work through the pain, and that makes you a hard worker. Yeah.
Yep.
So you folks in the class, do you? And that was Greg, right?
Yep.
So folks in the class, does that story support Greg being a hard worker? That claim? All right. So we're going to move forward because we have a lot to do, but that's a great example. Thanks, Greg. So you're going to include stories, possibly stories like that, in your presentation that are going to support the claims that you make about yourself. Because stories are much more exciting to hear than a list of things. Jordan, yeah, since I called you out, yes, I do still want to hear yours. What's your story? If you want to share it. Okay, so Jordan says, for my RPG video game that I'm making, I often spend at least 5 hours making and animating sprites, making maps, and developing quests so I can have as much of the game done as possible by the time I get hired by developers. I'd like to think that shows my work ethic. All right. So one of the things I'm seeing in this, Jordan, you spend at least 5 hours ever, 5 hours a day, 5 hours on each sprite. Great. Okay, so awesome example. Yeah, Jordan. Being able, so when we're quantifying is actually an amazing choice. Because if I just say I spend a ton of time working on my maps, that doesn't mean anything. But if I say that I've worked 5 hours a day, every day since I started school, on developing my own personal game, this project I'm not getting paid for, this project that has very many tasks, is very in-depth, then that's a really great story. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, that absolutely works. So these are the kind of stories you guys want to think about. You also want to think about showing as opposed to telling. So what do you guys think I mean by show, don't tell? What's that mean?
You don't have to say that many words to show what you have to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being concise in your word choice, absolutely. But what else? What else? Shelby says, use words that are very descriptive to create an image in the audience's mind. And Jordan says, instead of, like, I'm good at art, show examples. Yes and yes. So first of all, showing, not telling, we can describe, we can make a claim, and then we can support it with a story. And that's great. And then the other part of this is, remember, this presentation is paired with pictures, right? You're going to be using slides, and you can put pictures on slides. Do you remember the first lecture where we had the Socrates quote and we paired it with pictures? You remember how the Socrates quote meant different things when we paired it with different pictures? Yeah. So that's what I'm wanting you guys to do is find images. And it could be images of your own work, your own portfolio. It could be images of the company you want to work for. It could be images of things that you think add and emotionally to the story that you're telling. any of those things, but we are talking about pairing words with images, pairing spoken word with images, pairing written word with images, all of those things. So we want to start to think about the structure of a presentation. So what is the very, very most basic structure of a presentation? If we're going to divide it into 3 parts, you've already started to work on this in your plan. Shelby says the beginning, the middle, and end. Blake says that too. Yep, you guys are totally right. You want to have the beginning and the middle and the end. Great, so when we're talking about the beginning, what do you guys think lives in the beginning of a presentation? What do you guys think? Savannah, I love that. The what is versus what could be. So what is versus what could be is a structure that can continue throughout your presentation. It can be in the whole thing. One of the things that happens in the beginning of your presentation is you often say who you are. You often say why you're talking. And then you often say, hey audience, this is what I know about you, and this is why you care. So the beginning is a lot about saying, hey, this is who I am, this is who you are, and we have a lot in common. So some of that is about your potential as a candidate, like Jordan is saying, but the beginning is really about creating common ground. And it's a lot about saying, hey audience, I know you. I know who you are. So you're also starting to establish your credibility. So that's what happens in the beginning of a presentation. Now when we get to the middle of the presentation, this is where you really ramp into that what is versus what could be. It's also the part where you start to say, hey, if you bring me along, this is what I can do. These are the things that I'm awesome at. This is what you're doing right now, but when you add me to the mix, when you add a hard-working professional like me, this is what can happen. And some of this is you can say this is the work that I'm making right now. But with your resources, when the two of us work together, this is where we can meet. So Fancy, you're saying the story. What do you mean? It's interesting because a presentation is actually, because it has a beginning, middle, and end, a presentation really is kind of like a story. It's a story where it's a story made up of a ton of tiny stories. Yeah, Fancy. You will, yeah, you're going to and make sure you're including stories about the types of work that you do. And then you've got the end. And so what do you guys think? What do you guys think you do in the end?
Like reinstate your beginning and say this is why and this is how I thought this would be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the end is like, hey, so you guys remember those things I said? Let me say them one more time so you don't forget. Let me remind you why we have things in common. And then you're going to end with some kind of a punch. Okay? So you're not going to say, okay, well, I'm done, so bye. You don't want that to be the end of your presentation. You want the end of your presentation to be something that feels done, that feels finished. So you really want to know when the critical moment is. So we want to think about your spark lines. And you want to think about the things that really are going to grasp your audience. So we're thinking about that star moment. What will they always remember? So how many of you looked up star in the textbook? Excellent, Savannah. I'm glad you did. Jordan and Blake, yes! I've got some folks who have looked up the star moment in the textbook. Did that help you understand what we're looking for here? Awesome. Okay, so those of you who have not looked up a star moment in the textbook, I have it on good authority that what Nancy Duarte says is really helpful in understanding what we are looking for. So thank you guys. And we'll talk a little bit about it here. So there's 5 types of star moments. So first, you've got memorable dramatization. So this can be like a small prop or a demo. So if you guys get a chance, you can check out J.J. Abrams' talk, Magic Box. That is an example of a star moment. He's making some claims, and then he shows us he actually has a box that he shows us. Okay. Number 2, you can use repeatable sound bites. So repeatable sound bites, these are like giving people a rallying cry or something that will feed the headlines, slogans. We have a politician who gives repeatable sound bites on like a 3-second basis. Can you guys think of who I'm talking about? Yeah, Trump. Trump speaks in sound bites. Martin Luther King, absolutely fancy. Yeah, so Martin Luther King, if you go back to that I Have a Dream speech, I have a dream, that is a repeatable sound bite. What's the effect of the I have a dream? He repeats it a bunch, and does it get boring after he's said it 2 times? Blake says no. What happens instead, Blake?
What was the question?
So Martin Luther King says, I have a dream, and he says that phrase a bunch of times over the course of the speech. And so when he says, I have a dream, and then he talks and he says, I have a dream, and then he talks and says, I have a dream, I was asking if it's boring that he repeats, I have a dream, a bunch of times.
No, really. He's trying to get your attention, saying this is what he wants instead of what it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when he repeats, I have a dream, well, how does that make the audience feel? He repeats it a bunch of times, and every time he repeats it, the audience feels what?
I wonder what it was.
They wonder what it was. Blake says they feel hopeful. And makes them feel inspired, Jordan says. And so, like, do they stay with the same level of emotion, or is there an increase?
It's always an increase. They get more excited.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the cool things about an emotional, or about a rallying cry, is like, it's kind of like, you ever with a group of friends and somebody goes, yeah, and the other person's like, yeah, and then the other person's like, yeah, and so it just builds, right? That is the potential of a repeatable soundbite. So that's one kind of star moment. I know that sounds crazy, but it really is. Another star moment, you can make sure you include an evocative visual. So, of all the images that you choose, you want to pick one, or you can pick one to be the most, you're like, this one really gets me. Great. So, images are not just informative links, they are emotional links. So as you're thinking about your star moment, you're not going to want to use a chart or a graph. For a star moment, you're going to want to use something that really is evocative. So, like if we go back to this image.
That's like a repeating, right?
Say that again?
It's like repeating, like repetition.
No, not necessarily repetition, but see this image has a lot more of an emotional quality to me than this image. What about to you guys?
I see what you're saying. So the one that has the shooting star and all the color background, it will get your attention more than just the one that says 5 types, because it's interesting and it's colorful. The one that says 5 types of star, it's just information.
Yeah.
That's not really going to get your attention.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we want to pair our words with it as we're looking for a star moment. I might have 5 photographs that I think are really cool. But for the star moment that I'm going to plan to have, I want to choose the photograph that I find the most evocative. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Now, your star moment could also be really emotive storytelling. So, emotive storytelling is more than just saying, hey, I was walking down the road and I fell and I twisted my ankle and that really sucked. But I got better. So that would not be emotive storytelling.
So like when you're like the motive story you're trying to talk about is like something that motivated you from an early age, or
something that has an emotional quality. So in some of the other classes that I teach, when we're looking at persuasion, I've got a sample speech that's looking at the consequences of pollution. And here's an example I use in that class. And so we're talking about the consequences of pollution, and I tell this story. So, and then the claim is that pollution, water pollution, can have really negative effects on the animals that don't live in the water, just the animals that live in the surrounding area. So when I was a kid, I lived in Dade City, and in Dade City we have orange groves and we have lakes and we have cows. And one of the things that we have a lot of is because of the orange groves and the cows, we also end up with a lot of pesticides in the water. Okay. So when I was a kid, we had this dog, and her name was Sally. She was a lab rot mix, and we got her from the time when she was a puppy, and she was so protective of our family. When my little sister was 3, she would she would try to walk into the road from our driveway. And Sally was the most patient dog, because my sister would try to take a step. She was probably younger than 2. She'd try to take a step around Sally, and then Sally would take 1 step forward. And then she'd try to toddle around, and she'd try to get around Sally, and Sally'd take 1 step backwards. And she was the most amazing, loving dog, just super, super kind. And one of the things that Sally would do in her spare time is she would run off and she would play with the cows and she would swim in the lakes, because we lived around these things. And one day she came home and she had this huge lump on her head, and we didn't know what it was. And we took her to the vet, and we found out that she had cancer, and it wasn't just any cancer. It was a cancer that was specifically caused by the pesticides that were in the water of the lakes that she was swimming in. So that summer, Sally died. And a lot of her death had to do with the surrounding pollution. And so, to repeat the claim, pesticides in our water don't just affect the animals in the water, but they affect the animals in the surrounding areas too. So Fancy says this is sad. Yes, yes. So that is an example of a mode of storytelling. A dog who was a really wonderful part of our family, who we love.
Okay, so you're trying to get like emotional or so to get their attention, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a possibility for a star moment.
Okay.
And then another thing you can do for a star moment is you can share with us a shocking statistic. So what's gonna blow our minds? And you could very realistically find something like that for your own industry. Something that'll so not blow your mind necessarily, but what hasn't your potential employers, what haven't they thought of? What can you share with them that is really surprising? Okay, so these are the 5 different types of star moments, and you will want to choose one of these to incorporate in your presentation, and you're going to plan for it. And when you plan for it, you're going to be as specific as possible in your planning. We don't want it to be cliche, but we want it to be specific. So we're thinking about repeatable sound bites. Another place that we see these. So, does any sound come to mind when you think of McDonald's? So Savannah, it's the I'm loving it, but is it like a melodic or is it just
like the theme song?
Yeah, it's like ba-da-ba-ba-da. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a repeatable sound bite. There's also evocative visuals. We've talked about that already. And one of the things that you're thinking about with an evocative visual is something that'll help portray abstract concepts. So using images to add impact to the data that you are presenting. So perhaps if I'm talking about the number of people who die each year, maybe I don't want to show the numbers. Maybe I want to show a picture like this. You know what I mean? We have this quote. We're talking about pairing words with images. So can somebody read this out loud?
I can.
Yeah?
Right. It says more than 2,000 tropical forests planet by
Like, he came downstairs and my phone was on the chair, right? And my stuff was on the another chair. So he comes down, whatever. He puts his bag to where my phone is at. I didn't say anything like that.
Hello?
Whatever. I don't really think much about that. So I moved the chair because I was going to whip my stuff. And he's like, oh, you trying to take the chair away from me? And I'm like, no, my phone's on it. I mean, it's
So
not
whoever
like
is talking, I don't think you're talking to us in the class.
He's a Gemini, so he's like crazy. So he started going in. I'm like, okay, you know what, whatever. I don't care. I'm not trying, whatever. So I was like, and I told my friend in Spanish, I'm like, he's acting retarded.
Esterlyn.
And he said something.
Esterlyn, go ahead and if you're going to have a conversation outside of class, I think that's totally fine, but go ahead and turn off your mic. Cool, thank you.
You want me to start over?
Yeah, can you start over, Fancy?
Yeah, more than 2,000 tropical forest plants have been identified by scientists as having anti-cancer properties.
Yeah, great. So when we see a quote like this, do you guys get a specific picture in your head?
I see like scientists like doing some research about the.
Okay, so cool. Scientists doing research. Blake, Jordan, Savannah. Greg, Blake, you're seeing tropical plants. Savannah, not really. Greg, Brazil, sure. What's the emotional quality to it? More than 2,000 tropical forest plants have been identified by scientists as having anti-cancer properties. Is there an emotional quality to that?
Like, isn't it like saying that these plants could probably help the cancer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a hope. So Blake is saying hope. Fancy, it sounds like you're saying hope. Okay. So what happens? What happens when we pair this quote with this picture? Does that change the emotional qualities? Does that change the picture that was in your head?
Kinda. I was seeing people like in a science lab with some tropical plants from different countries.
Yeah. Okay. So Blake, hopeful. Greg, now I'm thinking redwoods. Yeah, so we've got a totally different forest happening. So we've got pictures can change the emotional quality and all of that. So think about that as you are choosing the images, the pictures that you will put in your presentation. We also want to make sure we're doing emotive storytelling, and I gave you an example of that just a moment ago. If you would like another example, I recommend checking out Susan Cain's video, The Power of Introverts, on TED Talk. She does a lot of emotive storytelling, and it's really engaging. So check her out. She's great. And Steve Jobs is actually famous for giving shocking statistics in the middle of his speech. Listen to this. He said this in a presentation. We are now selling over 5 million songs a day now. Isn't that unbelievable? 5 million songs a day. That's 58 songs every second of every minute of every hour of every day. Wow. So he doesn't just say we're selling 5 million songs a day. What does he do?
He shows it.
He shows it.
He has the information and the data.
Yeah, exactly. So Savannah says he elaborates. Greg says he breaks it down. Yeah. So and then something else he does is he reacts. You see that? 5 million songs a day. 5 million songs a day. And then he says, isn't that unbelievable? So when you're sharing a shocking statistic, you want to make sure that you let the statistic affect you, the speaker, as much as you expect that statistic to affect your audience when they hear it. So something to think about in your delivery. 5 million songs a day. Isn't that unbelievable? And then break it down, because that really helps it sink in. That's cool. Okay, so a shocking statistic. That's a star moment. So what we're going to do now, guys, is we are going to take a 5-minute potty break. So go ahead and take 5 minutes. What I'm going to do during that 5 minutes is I'm going to stop this video so we can start a new video so that we don't have a 2-hour chunk for folks to watch later.
I'm just happy I'm not one of those people again.
It's more fun to be here, isn't it, Fancy?
Yes.
Yes. And I understand that most people don't come because it just doesn't work out, but glad you were able to be here.
Me too.
All right, so I will be back in 5 minutes. My clock says it is, what does my clock say? My clock says it is 5:09, so let's be back here at your equivalent of 5 minutes from now. I'm going to call that 5:20. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yep.
That's not at all right. That was not 5 minutes. This is why I teach public speaking and not math. Okay, so 5:15. 5:15. That's much more right.
That sounds way better.